All right, hello, good morning. My name is Eleanor Hawkins. I author the Axios Communicators newsletter, and we're really excited to get things kicked off this morning. I'm joined here with Bea Perez, who is the Global Chief Communications,
Sustainability,
Strategic Partnerships. I know, I was
blah,
like,
blah,
it
blah.
is a lot. It is a big job that you have, and we're so excited to chat with you about that. But first, I kind of want to level set. Like, what are you doing here in Davos? What are you hoping to accomplish? This is your 14th year?
Yes, my 14th, which I think after the first year I came, I thought, why do people come to Davos, right? It was a little hectic and crazy. And over time, I realized it saves you a lot of travel throughout the rest of the year. Everyone is here in terms of NGOs, governments, other corporate leaders, and you can learn a lot from others if you sit and listen and really engage. And so for me, you know, I'm not the CEO of the company, so I'm not necessarily in the Congress Center doing a lot of those events. But what I have found is that being in forums like this, and so thank you for inviting me here today to do this, being here with Axios and all of you in the room helps me to actually listen and hear and understand what's happening in your parts of the world, what's happening with your businesses, and where can Coke improve? Where else should we be leaning in? So for me, over time, I found it very valuable to come to these types of forums and to really listen. Listening for me is more important in Davos than talking, even though I am talking today.
Well, one issue that seems to be touching all businesses and all parts of business is AI.
Yes.
So let's kind of start big picture. 2024 was all about experimentation. 2025 is about implementing. How is your team using AI? What are some key learnings that you have?
Sure. I'll actually go back to 2023 for us. It was March 2023 when we started to experiment. And also, I'd say with generative AI. So we've been using AI in our business for forecasting for different areas, and that's widely known in terms of some of our folks who've talked about it. For us, when we looked at AI, we thought, this is very interesting, and how can we actually bring generative AI together with the rest of the physical world and in marketing that we were already doing? So we had created an ad called Masterpiece. It started with this beautiful piece of art from Andy Warhol, and then it took sort of the live animation in 3D with generative AI and created this story around it. It did very well. Consumers loved it, but that was sort of a fusion of testing and piloting. What could it do for us? And we thought, this is going to be very interesting going forward. What else could we do? So fast forward, this past year in 2024, we launched a partnership with OpenAI and Bain. And we started to test things like our own Coca-Cola ChatGPT. So put our policies in there. So say, you're a new employee to the company. You want to know what's the entertainment and travel policy. How much can you spend on a lunch? Well, you'd have to sift through lots of paper on a website in the past. Now you just go to Coca-Cola ChatGPT, you ask the question, gives you the information. Or in today's world, I could take my 46 Davos briefs, put it in there and say, what are the key highlights? So lots of different ways to experiment. We have found that 70% of our employees do still use it or have used it in the last 90 days. They use it in many different ways, so that's been great. I'd say that then also using and experimenting in terms of the marketing going one step further now. If some of you read, it was a little controversial.
I do want to get to that.
You do?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll spend time on that.
Okay.
But going back to what you mentioned around your own GPT and employees going and asking questions, I would imagine that that's also a great feedback loop for you in a sense, because you can know what employees might misunderstand, what they need more information on. How are you using the learnings from the inquiries that you're receiving?
Yeah, so we learned a lot that actually we needed to bring video to the table as well and thinking about training and development. And so what we found is actually there's a tool called Beyond Go. It enabled us to take some bits and bytes of some really deep, meaty policies and actually synthesize it in a video that was maybe more relevant to our employees if they just wanted to watch a 2-minute video to get the high-level view if they didn't have to go deep. And so our learning is that we needed to bring video, we needed to bring audio. We also needed to make sure that we were also putting in some external trends and themes into it and not just the internal policies, that people wanted to use it to write about current topics, think about consumer data. So how are they bringing all of that in? It's a tall ask. And so you have to have data scientists. You have to have someone fact-checking the data that's going in. You have to make sure that you don't have the halos, right? And so there were lots of things that we had to sort of learn along the way, and we're still learning. We are far from perfect, And we have found that we still have to make sure that you have real people looking at it and fact-checking some of the stuff that comes out the other end, just to make sure it hasn't gotten made up.
Yes, that kind of gets me to the next question, which is around a lot of your job is about protecting and enhancing corporate reputation. Obviously, innovation helps drive reputation, but there's some risks. So what are some of the biggest reputational challenges you've seen with incorporating AI into your work?
Is this where I can talk about the Christmas ad?
We can, yeah, let's do it. Because that's a good example.
I think it's a great example, which is we were so excited. We said, we're going to do this. We're going to use AI 100%, go all in. Our creatives were even excited, believe it or not, internally.
And this is the polar bear holiday commercial.
Yes, yes, right. The Sunbloom Santa, if some of you know the Coke ads, every year we have Sunbloom Santa. We show this beautiful experience with the polar bears. And it was, using different technologies, so not just one AI tool. It was multiple combined. And everyone looked at it afterwards, thought this is great. It tested really, really well. We aired it. The controversy started. So all the way from some individuals who were writing and blogging about it saying Coca-Cola had lost its soul. Do you know, I've been at Coke 30 years, and I was like, that was a dagger. I was like, no, of course, no. We're actually experimenting. This is innovation. We want to see what's out there. And so it made us pause and reflect and realize, actually, the adoption model for AI is not fully there. We have to be very careful that we preserve some of the key important assets to our business that are relevant and important to consumers, and make sure that we really understand first so I also say that we probably should have done a little more consumer research, because the ad tested well, but I'm not sure we really said it was fully AI created. And so I think making sure we're asking the right questions and putting in the right research. Now, at the end of the day, what we found is that it was probably split. There were just as many people who loved it, thought it was innovative and cool. And if you did the generational split, it was usually millennial or Gen Z who liked it more. We also looked at populations. And so what we found is that actually a lot of the concerns in the writing were coming from the creative community, from agencies, right? And it was because, really trying to look at job disruption. So we learned a lot from it. I still love the ad. I personally love the ad. It had the polar bears. It had Santa. It had everything that I think we're known for. But, and I felt it was a really great campaign. At the same time, we've learned, we're like, we just have to be a little more careful, more protective to make sure that we're not going too far.
So part of your remit, too, is strategic partnerships. You mentioned the creative community. So I would imagine we will see more AI-generated ads in the future. Are you pulling in the creative community in that process? Are you partnering with them? Are you doing more research, more social listening with that community?
Yes, that's one of the key learnings, which is making sure they have a seat at the table and they're helping us. Because also what we realize is, so the polar bear ad is something that we've done every year. It's not that hard to write the prompts, right? So we know we want the polar bear, Sunbloom Santa, and magic. I'm simplifying it. But to really get more innovative and creative and to actually create ads that maybe are new to the company, new to the brand, you do need to have expert creatives who understand how to write the prompts. What should go into it? What should it look and feel like? Making sure that it's historically accurate if you're going to put some, archival facts into it. And so for us, we found that that's really important. And we drafted off of another key learning. So one aspect of creativity that actually worked really well for us, and we found that we've got to bring this into some of our innovation, is when we launched our partnership with OpenAI and Bain, we actually said we're going to take out of the archives our creative, and we're going to let consumers create ads, and we're going to put it up on Times Square, Piccadilly Circle. And that was, really different for Coke. You're sort of releasing your brand in the hands of someone else and letting them create. And we did that with the creative community. They loved it, but then they were the ones who actually said, you need to open source this. You need real people to actually do this. So we did it. It was 17 countries that we saw participate, consumers in 17 countries, 120,000 different pieces of creative. And it created such an energy and such an excitement because it was taking a physical asset that existed, but then playing around with it from the consumer perspective. And then we actually launched it. And so they were creating the advertising. And what we found is that the creative community supported that a lot more than taking something fully AI generated and not involving the human aspect of it. And, we're about people at the end of the day. We're about relationships. And so for us, that's an important learning. So we want to carry forward that great work that took place into sort of this new world that we're in of how do we use AI in more innovative ways while still making sure people are at the center.
And then making sure that the audiences know that people are still involved
Correct.
somehow.
That's it, yes.
And so I want to talk about the challenges of communicating around AI. Talk to me about that. I think as communication professionals over the past few years, there's been a trend of maybe shying away from acronyms, ESG, DEI, and actually talking about the action and the impact. So how are you taking those learnings and incorporating them into how you speak about AI?
Yeah, so I think for us also, so we have responsible AI guidelines internally. So what we said is we first have to start with what are the expectations and how should we make sure we have some guidelines and parameters. And so it's around transparency, safety, security, privacy, protection. There's a few other aspects of it. And making sure that we train our individuals on how to apply responsible AI so they themselves don't get caught in a situation where they're doing something that maybe would violate one of those principles. And so we've spent a lot of time going through that training and trying to make sure that we're also updating the responsible AI guidelines as we get more information from either a government body who might put a law in place or through other industry experts. So that's been really number one. The second piece to it is making sure we're talking to our employees directly about how we're using it and how we're not using it. So there are some rules around it. So while you heard me say earlier that we have used AI for forecasting, we also have a team of people, financial forecasts, who do it. We look at both models to see how are things going, which one actually is panning out, what's the new information that needs to come in place. We're not going to replace our forecasting, to move totally with AI. It's always going to have people involved because there's some nuances in the business and how you look at the data. So for us, it's educating our employee base. So when they use the tools like ChatGPT, that they make sure that they have all those same guidelines in place for themselves. So say they create the next press release. So next press release is going out, they're going to talk about a brand launch. Making sure that it's accurate, the data is grounded in something that's been assured through our accounting firm if we're using data for a sustainability campaign, and that making sure that they're not bypassing any of the protocols that we have in place. So it's complicated, but what I'd say is that really teaching and training people how to use AI, but in a responsible way.
Yes, we're talking about responsibility, we're talking about guardrails. You mentioned sustainability, which is also, again, part of your remit.
Yes.
So how are you thinking about your AI use and its impact on your sustainability commitments?
Yeah, so for me, I'm still learning how to bring those worlds together. So for me, I'm not using it today in the way maybe some others might be, but I think there's some thoughts and ideas on how we could. I'm starting to look at how some people are looking at forecasting where future disasters might be so we can actually build in resiliency in our communities up front. So those are some tools that I know exist through Google, Microsoft, and some of these other experts who can look at and predict. And I think that those are the ways we could use it in the future so the disaster doesn't, well, if it strikes, at least the community is prepared. At least there can be some things that hopefully Coke can play a part in to make sure that we're a part of the solution before the disaster hits. We're learning. So what I'd say is that for us, it's still hardworking people on the ground doing the work in terms of water, looking at the data, same thing on packaging, same thing in terms of our climate work. The technology is really just to double check and to look at the trends, but I have not brought those worlds together yet.
I want to talk about forecasting and finding audience, because one challenge for communicator and corporate affairs professionals is finding those audiences given the fragmented media landscape. So are you using AI to help you identify your key audiences, where they might be receiving their information? And then I know we talked earlier about influencers and how you're using AI in the influencer space. Share more about how it is informing your communication strategy.
Sure. So our agencies that we work with are the ones who are helping us to figure out how to use AI to find those audiences, but also, more importantly, what's relevant to those audiences. So finding them is one thing, but knowing, do they care about our water work or do they care more about Sunbloom Santa? So what do they care about most? Do they care about the next brand launch? Is it going to be a vanilla Coke or is it going to be a Coke creation? So understanding that nuance, that's where the data and using AI has been very helpful to sort of source and see what is the conversation happening with these groups and these audiences across either social media or some of the other areas. And then how do you think about applying key messages that are hyper-local or hyper-targeted to those areas. That's where influencers come into play. So we once, used just a handful of influencers, because when you use influencers to help market your brands, there's also risk that's involved there too. And so, or you might reach just a small group of people. So we're, doing a lot of, we use tools to do background checks. There's, I didn't mention it earlier, but I can mention it. Our CMO talks about it, Creator IQ, to actually do some sort of guardrails to say, well, if we're going to sign up with these influencers, do they follow certain value structures? What do they do with their content? What are their audiences like? And then it's a paid model. It's not, this isn't free. And so there's also parameters that are required to make sure that they're putting sponsored by Coca-Cola. We don't want them actually being an influencer for the brand without saying they're an influencer for the brand, because that creates lots of other issues. And so using tools like that helps us do the background checks, helps us put the guardrails in place, helps us do the post-analysis. But the beauty of it is that influencer knows what's relevant to their local audience. We will share our data with them and say, we've noticed that in your region with your audience, typically they tend to talk more about water work versus packaging. So when you're talking about our brands, it's totally up to you, but this might be something you want to engage in. If you need information from us, let us know. And then what's really interesting is they create their own content, and it's in their own words. And by the way, it's not always positive. We have, we're not going to force them to say anything that they are not going to want to say naturally, because their audience will know that then that lacks integrity or authenticity. And we don't want that either. We want it to connect. And so it's a balanced approach, which is a little scary for a brand marketer or communications expert, because you're actually putting the control of your brand in the hands of the real people who are going to say and think and feel what's important to them. And that I have found that after a couple years of going through working with influencers, we have about 10,000 a year that we work with now, you get more comfortable in terms of actually there's so many people who know exactly what to do in terms of talking about the brand and who love the brand and who will share their personal stories. And when they balance it, you know what? It gives us learning. It helps us be better. If we actually can understand what they're saying and where we can improve, we can learn through that and we can pivot.
Last question for you before we end on our one fun thing. What is the one thing that kind of keeps you up at night when it comes to this technology and innovation?
When it's used for evil. I really do worry. And so if it's used for evil, and I read everything everyone in this room reads, right? And so what if someone tampers with our water systems through it? What if someone tampers with the energy grid? What if someone tampers with the data, misinformation? There's so much that can be used for evil in our world. And if you have someone who's really intelligent and who has bad intent, it can really go wrong. And so for us, it's really important to monitor and to make sure that when we see things that don't look right to us, that we engage. And I know that some companies might wait till they see mass trends around it. For us, I want to know right away. I want to know if there's one thing that doesn't look right. I want us to engage and understand what it is. And maybe we got it wrong. Maybe there's nothing wrong at all. But for me, it's really important to keep your eye on the pulse of these tools, and I think when you get to the one fun question, maybe I'll add this in for that. Some things are, can be dangerous, but some things actually, if you're not afraid of it, if you test and try, then, and you have the right sort of things in place to protect you, it'll be okay. You just have to be aware that it's still dangerous. And so you know what my fun example might be, so
yes.
I'll bleed it into that one.
We were chatting earlier, and you were telling me about a trip you just took. You and your son go scuba diving together. You mentioned you came across a poisonous spitting fish, which I didn't know was a real thing. Tell us more about this.
Yeah, so this will sort of go into the last question too. I'm actually really afraid of sea life, very afraid. I think it's beautiful. I admire it. I love our oceans. I definitely want to protect them. My son is the one who said, Mom, I want something just you and I do together. Of course he picked scuba diving. The one thing he knows I'm like really afraid of. So it took me 2 years to get certified. It took him like a month and he was certified. We did this big dive this year for the holidays. And we went down almost 80 meters, which is deep. So I think someone told me it's 200 yards or feet, whatever. I'm really bad at math. I need AI for math. But anyway, so we were down there. And you get all these conversations in terms of there's going to be sharks down there. There's going to be poisonous fish down there. Don't touch the coral. Make sure you're not touching any sea life, actually. You can't touch them because you can hurt them. And so, meanwhile, I'm thinking, but they can hurt me too if I get too close. So for me, it's kind of like AI. I knew that there were bad things down there. Now, I saw black-tip sharks. I saw reef sharks. They're not so dangerous. I was told if you see a white-tip shark, you better be really concerned. I didn't see one, thank goodness. But I knew what to do if I had. I also, communications, right, really matters. Underwater, you need to be able to communicate. So I had to learn all the hand signals and make sure I didn't mess those up. So this means shark. So my son, I didn't see the sharks at first. My son's on the other side, and he's doing this, and I'm just like, I don't see it. Where is it? And then it comes up right alongside of me, and I went, so of course he watches me panic. Then I look to my left. This is now getting to your point of my spitting fish. So I had seen all these beautiful pictures of beautiful fish. They look gorgeous. A triggerfish is very colorful and blue and purple. This boxfish is yellow like a school bus with black dots. That's the spitting fish. By the way, I also learned that there's a shrimp down there that actually can have a punch, which punches through a crab shell. Wow. Unbelievable. And of course, I'm looking at these really beautiful, and I'm looking, and I can't remember which ones are going to kill me and which ones aren't, And then I'm looking over. We also had a true diving expert with us because my son and I are not true diving experts. And I can watch him doing this to me. I was like, what? I'm not close to the reef, and I can see the fish are coming closer to me. He's like, gotta back up. And I realized, because that's the fish that actually could kill you through its spit in the water. So then I start to panic, of course. So then I'm doing this, which means something's wrong, right? And my son is just shaking his head no. He comes over and he's like, okay, are you okay? Of course, the other thing I learned is I almost did this. This in diving means go up, right? And then I'm like, oh, no, I'm okay. But I had this moment. And so I know this is a crazy analogy, but I feel like that's the story of AI, right? There are some dangerous things down there. If you don't go deep and if you don't try it, you're never going to see the beauty. And so that's my sort of closing crazy analogy.
It's a great way to sum it up. Bea, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Eleanor.
Stick around. We have more coming up. We're just going to change the set real fast. Thank you.